I never intended to write this. In 1913, we were ordered to burn our journals, seal our mouths, and swear that nothing followed us out of that frozen wasteland. Officially, our patrol vanished due to exposure. Unofficially, something ancient woke beneath the ice and learned how to hunt men. I was infantry, trained, armed, disciplined. None of that mattered when the snow began to whisper our names at night. What stalked us did not fear rifles or fire. It remembered the land before uniforms, before borders, before war itself. This account survived only because I did, and because the cold still hasn't finished with me. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. Some missions arrive with coordinates. Others arrive with silence, and you're expected to march anyway. The orders reached us in early 1913, folded thin as if the paper itself feared the cold it described. No ceremony, no speeches, no flags snapping in the wind. Just a stamped directive slid across a scarred wooden table in the command hut. The ink still sharp, smelling faintly of oil and smoke. We were to move north beyond the last confirmed supply post, to survey terrain and determine whether a permanent route could be established. Simple words, clean words, the kind that hide their teeth. I was an infantry corporal then, attached to a mixed unit pulled together from men who had already survived too much to ask questions. When the lieutenant read the orders aloud, his voice never wavered, but his eyes did. He kept glancing at the map spread before us, at the pale empty space where our destination should have been. There were no grid lines there, no elevation marks, just a blank smear of white, as if the cartographer had simply given up. We joked about it at first, the way soldiers always do. Said we were marching off the edge of the world. Said maybe we'd fall straight through the paper and into the sea. No one laughed very hard. The locals didn't either. The settlement at the frontier was little more than timber huts half buried in snow, smoke crawling lazily from chimneys like it didn't want to rise any higher. When we asked for guides, the elders turned their faces away. One man spat into the snow and muttered something in a dialect none of us understood. Another crossed himself, fingers shaking, and backed into his doorway as if we carried a sickness. We offered coin. We offered protection. We even offered rifles. Nothing moved them. A woman finally spoke, her voice thin as cracking ice, and said the land beyond did not belong to men. Not anymore. The lieutenant thanked her and ordered us to prepare to march. That should have been the moment I realized this was no ordinary patrol. We set out at dawn, boots crunching over frozen ground, breath fogging thick enough to blur the man ahead of me. The cold was immediate and invasive, not the gradual bite you expect, but a presence that wrapped itself around bone and thought alike. It found gaps in gloves, seams in coats, weak places in the mind. Every step felt like permission being taken rather than given. Our equipment protested almost immediately. Leather stiffened. Metal burned bare skin. A rifle bolt froze halfway back and had to be struck with a rock to close. The map made no sense the farther we went. Landmarks appeared where none were marked, then vanished again behind veils of blowing snow. Hills shifted shape depending on the angle of the light. The compass needle trembled, then slowly began to drift, refusing to settle. We blamed faulty instruments. We always blame what we can name. By the second day, sound itself seemed to thin. The wind died without warning, leaving a silence so complete it rang in my ears. No birds, no distant cracking ice. Even our boots sounded muted, like we were walking across packed cloth instead of earth. I remember turning once, for no reason I could explain, and feeling a sudden unease settle between my shoulder blades. The tracks behind us were already fading, softening, as if the snow was eager to erase proof we had ever passed that way. One of the men joked that the land didn't want witnesses. No one replied. We made camp before nightfall, driving stakes into ground that resisted like frozen meat. As the sun dipped, the temperature plunged with it, far faster than it should have. Our breath came out in ragged bursts, white clouds torn apart by a wind that hadn't been there moments before. The fire burned low and wrong, flames bending inward, crackling with a sound like whispering. I sat cleaning my rifle, fingers numb despite the gloves, and tried to shake the feeling that we were being measured. Not watched, not hunted, measured, like something was deciding whether we were worth the effort. When darkness finally settled, it did not feel natural. It pressed close, heavy and deliberate, swallowing the edges of the firelight. Beyond that circle, the world ceased to exist. No stars, no moon, just black and the sound of our own breathing. I remember thinking of the woman in the village, the way she had refused to meet our eyes. I remember thinking of the blank space on the map, how clean and untouched it had looked. And I remember very clearly the moment I realized the cold was not just weather. It had intention. It had patience. We believed the danger lay ahead, but the first warning came from the silence behind us. Cold can kill a man, but what haunted us was how deliberately it chose when to try. By the morning after our first camp, the temperature had fallen so sharply it felt like stepping into another world. The air burned our lungs with each breath, sharp and dry, scraping the inside of my chest like broken glass. Frost crept along rifle barrels and straps even while we marched, blooming white as if the metal itself was surrendering. I had known winter campaigns before, every soldier has, but this was different. This cold did not settle. It advanced. It pressed closer with every hour, closing distance the way an enemy line does when it senses weakness. Our breath froze in our mustaches, eyelashes clumped together with ice, and still the cold kept tightening its grip. One of the men checked the thermometer we carried for surveying purposes and swore under his breath. The reading made no sense for the time of day, or the latitude, or any rule of nature we understood. The lieutenant ordered us forward anyway. Orders don't change just because the world stops behaving. Before midday, the compasses began to misbehave. At first it was subtle, a twitch, a slow drift that could be blamed on poor calibration. Then the needle spun outright, circling again and again as if laughing at us. We tried another compass, then another. Same result. The maps were useless now, landmarks swallowed by blowing snow and shifting light. We marched by instinct and discipline alone, holding formation out of habit more than confidence. My rifle jammed without warning, bolt frozen solid despite careful maintenance. I held it under my coat, pressing metal to body heat, feeling the chill seep through fabric and skin until my ribs ached. Others weren't so lucky. A private screamed when he pulled off a glove to adjust his sling and realized his fingertips had gone pale and waxy in minutes. Frostbite, that fast, that deep. We wrapped his hands and kept moving, because stopping felt worse than marching. The land offered no shelter, only shallow rises and narrow cuts where the wind howled louder, funneled into knives. By the time we made camp that night, exhaustion weighed heavier than our packs. We built the fire higher this time, fed it more fuel, but it never seemed enough. The flames leaned inward again, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally across the snow. I took first watch, standing just beyond the circle of light, rifle cradled, ears straining. That was when I felt it, the sense of presence beyond sight. Not sound, not movement I could point to, just the certainty that something existed in the dark, pacing the edge of the firelight. My eyes kept dragging toward the same patch of blackness between two snowdrifts, as if drawn by an invisible thread. I told myself it was fatigue. Cold does strange things to the mind. Still, I did not turn my back. When the watch changed, I slept poorly, jolting awake at imagined footsteps, convinced for seconds at a time that I could see shapes shifting just beyond the glow. Morning brought no relief. The cold had deepened again, impossibly so, and the sky hung low and colorless, like a lid about to close. We marched on, slower now, every movement deliberate to conserve warmth. Boots crunched with a brittle sound, snow breaking like thin bone. Somewhere ahead, the land dipped into a wide basin, and as we descended, the silence returned. No wind, no echo, just the sound of our breathing and the faint creak of leather. A man beside me whispered my name, voice tight and pointed. For a moment I thought I saw something move along the ridge behind us. A darker shape sliding against the white, too smooth, too purposeful. When I focused, it was gone. The lieutenant dismissed it as drifting snow. He did not sound convinced. That night, the sense of being watched became undeniable. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward that vanished before they could rise far. Beyond the light, the darkness felt layered, as if depth itself had weight. I heard it then, soft, deliberate crunching, not from any direction I could pinpoint, circling wide, patient. I held my breath to listen, and the sound stopped, as though whatever made it knew I was paying attention. My pulse hammered in my ears, loud enough to betray me. Across the camp, I saw another sentry stiffen, his head turning slightly, eyes wide. We exchanged a glance that said everything without words. We were not alone out there. Whatever shared the wasteland with us understood distance, timing, restraint. It did not rush. It did not reveal itself. It observed. It learned. When dawn finally broke, pale and weak, no tracks surrounded the camp. No sign of movement at all. That frightened me more than footprints ever could. By the third night, we stopped asking if something followed us and started asking what it wanted. The land does not always speak loudly. Sometimes it leaves reminders and waits to see if you understand them. We found the marks just after midday, when the light flattened the world into white and shadow and distance became impossible to judge. One moment we were moving in disciplined silence, heads down, breath measured, and the next the column slowed without command. I nearly walked into the man ahead of me. He was staring at the ground as if it had suddenly betrayed him. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach tighten. The snow had been disturbed in a wide arc around our path, pressed down into shapes that were neither random nor natural. They were impressions, deep, evenly spaced, curving as though something massive had paced there deliberately. Each mark was broader than a man's chest, the edges smooth, not torn or scattered the way an animal's tracks would be. Whatever made them had weight and control. It had moved without hurry. We spread out cautiously, rifles raised, boots sinking into powder that squealed softly under pressure. The marks formed a loose circle around where we had stopped, as if the thing that made them had been watching us for some time before choosing to leave a sign. I knelt to examine one impression, gloved hand hovering above it, afraid to touch. The snow inside was compacted hard, almost glossy, like ice polished by pressure rather than cold. No claw marks, no drag, just depth. The lieutenant ordered sketches made for the survey log, his voice tight, clipped, betraying a strain he hadn't shown before. One of the older soldiers muttered a word I didn't recognize, then fell silent when the lieutenant looked at him. As we moved on, unease settled into the spaces between us. Conversation died completely. Every man walked with his head half-turned now, eyes flicking from horizon to shadow, from ridge to hollow. The basin ahead rose gently, and as we crested it, something dark cut through the snow like a wound. Stone. Ancient, weathered stone, exposed where the wind had stripped the ground bare. We approached it carefully, weapons ready. It was not a natural outcrop. The angles were wrong, too deliberate. Carved blocks jutted from the earth, fused together by ice and time. A ruin or what remained of one. No records mentioned structures this far north. No maps acknowledged their existence. The air around it felt different, heavier, as though sound itself hesitated there. We found carvings along the stone, shallow grooves worn nearly smooth by centuries of frost. Figures were etched into the surface, tall, elongated shapes standing over smaller ones. Some of the smaller figures wore clothing that looked disturbingly familiar. Coats, packs, long objects slung over shoulders. Soldiers, from different eras, different shapes of uniform, all rendered in the same crude, unmistakable way. One carving showed a line of men walking into a cleft in the earth, watched by something towering behind them. Another showed fire offered upward, hands raised in what might have been pleading or surrender. No faces were detailed clearly, but the posture was unmistakable. Submission. The older soldier spoke again, quietly this time, telling us what his grandmother used to say about the far north. About a keeper of winters, older than borders, older than flags. A thing bound to the land, awakened when men tried to tame what was never meant to be claimed. He said it was not evil, not in the way men understand it. It was a judge, collector. The lieutenant ordered him to stop. Folklore had no place in official reports. Still, no one laughed. As we pulled away from the ruin, a feeling of having crossed an invisible line settled over me. The cold sharpened again, sudden and biting, as if reacting to our presence. Not long after, the rear guard reported something wrong. One of the men assigned to watch our trail was gone. Not missing in the vague sense of confusion, but absent in a way that defied explanation. His rifle lay half buried in snow, strap snapped clean through. His pack sat upright nearby, undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away. His footprints ended abruptly, heels dug in as if he had stopped. Then nothing. We searched in widening circles, calling his name despite orders to conserve breath. Our voices sounded thin and wrong, swallowed almost immediately. The basin returned nothing. It was as if the land had simply closed over him. When we regrouped, fear had finally breached discipline. Hands shook as magazines were checked. Eyes darted to every shadow. We made camp early, closer together than before, backs almost touching as if proximity could replace certainty. Night fell faster than it should have, darkness spilling over the snow in thick waves. As the fire burned low, a sound reached us from beyond the light. A voice, faint, strained, unmistakably human. It spoke the missing man's name, then ours one by one, mimicking the cadence of our speech but missing something essential. Emotion, perhaps, or breath. No one answered. No one slept. We understood then that the marks were not warnings meant to keep us away. They were records, proof of those who had come before and failed to leave. And somewhere beyond the firelight, something waited to add us to the stone. The moment a man disappears without a sound is the moment war stops making sense. Dawn did not bring clarity. It brought confirmation. The voice we had heard in the night was gone, swallowed by daylight as completely as the man it imitated. No echoes lingered. No footprints circled the camp. The snow lay smooth and unbroken beyond our fire's reach, as if nothing had ever stood there listening. We broke camp in silence, each of us moving with the brittle precision of men afraid to waste motion. No one said the missing soldier's name again. Saying it felt dangerous, like calling attention to ourselves. The lieutenant ordered tighter spacing, overlapping fields of fire, rear guard doubled. We advanced slower now, scanning ridges, hollows, the empty sky. The cold continued its steady pressure, not dramatic, not sudden, but relentless, tightening muscles and thoughts alike. I felt it gnawing at my knees, my jaw, the base of my skull, a dull ache that never eased. By midday, the hunt began in earnest. We didn't see it at first. We felt the change. The air thickened, heavy with a low vibration I could sense more than hear, like distant thunder trapped beneath ice. One of the men stumbled, swore, and went down hard. When we reached him, his rifle lay twisted beside him, the barrel bent as if crushed by enormous hands. Metal does not fold like that under cold. He was shaking violently, eyes wide, insisting something had brushed past him, something tall that moved without disturbing the snow. The lieutenant dismissed it as shock, ordered the man helped to his feet. 10 minutes later, another scream tore through the silence, sharp and sudden, cut off almost immediately. We spun toward the sound, rifles raised. All we found was a shallow depression in the snow and a helmet lying upside down, its liner torn out. No blood, no tracks, just absence, precise and absolute. Panic rippled through the line despite training. Orders were shouted, repeated, overlapping. We formed a defensive circle, backs outward, muzzles sweeping the horizon. The silence pressed in again, thicker now, expectant. That was when it revealed its method. Not by charging, not by roaring, but by patience. A shape shifted at the edge of my vision, tall and indistinct, like a shadow standing where no object should cast one. I swung my rifle toward it, heart hammering, finger tightening on the trigger. The shape slid away smoothly, dissolving into the pale glare of snow before I could fire. Another man shouted, firing blindly into the white. The report cracked loud and lonely, echoing once, then dying. Nothing answered. The lieutenant ordered a controlled withdrawal toward a narrow cut in the terrain ahead, a shallow ravine that might offer cover. We moved fast, boots slipping, breath ragged. Halfway there, the cold spiked sharply, a sudden plunge that stole air from my lungs. My vision blurred, edges frosting over. I tasted metal and realized I was biting my tongue to keep from screaming. Somewhere to my left, a man collapsed. As I turned to help, something struck him from behind. Not a blow I could see, but a force that lifted him clean off his feet. He vanished upward in a spray of powdery snow, dragged into nothing. His scream lasted less than a second. Discipline shattered then. We ran. Training dissolved into raw instinct as we fled for the ravine, firing wildly into the empty air. Bullets tore through snow and stone, useless, unanswered. The thing did not chase us openly. It didn't need to. It moved parallel, unseen, cutting angles, waiting for mistakes. A man stumbled and did not rise. Another slowed, clutching his leg, frostbitten, flesh stiff and useless. He begged us not to leave him. The sound of his voice still haunts me. We reached the ravine at last, tumbling into its shallow shelter, backs to the stone, weapons raised. The wind howled above us, carrying with it a low, resonant sound that vibrated through bone. Not a roar, not speech, something older. We waited, seconds stretching thin, breath fogging thick in the confined space. Snow sifted down from above as if disturbed by movement we could not see. Then, from the mouth of the ravine, something passed between us and the light. Not fully visible, not fully solid. A towering outline, distorted, its edges blurring like heat shimmer despite the cold. The air grew painfully still. I felt pressure in my ears, behind my eyes, as if the world itself leaned closer. No shot was fired. No order was given. We were frozen, not by fear alone, but by the certainty that aggression would mean annihilation. After a long moment, the pressure eased. The shape withdrew. Sound returned in a rush. The wind, our breathing, the frantic pounding of blood. We did not move for a long time. When we finally emerged, the ravine floor held new marks pressed deep into the snow, larger than before, closer. The hunt had ended for the moment. It had tested us, measured our response, taken what it wanted. We understood now that running only entertained it. Survival would demand something else, something we had not yet learned. The land did not block our escape. It invited us downward. We moved after the encounter in the ravine like men already half-buried. Each step careful, each breath counted. No one argued anymore. Rank still existed, but fear had flattened it into something shared, something equal. The lieutenant no longer spoke of routes or objectives. He spoke only of shelter, of distance, of surviving the next hour. The cold had settled into us completely now, not just numbing skin but dulling thought, slowing reactions. I remember realizing, with a strange clarity, that the land was no longer trying to stop us. It was guiding us. The path ahead sloped gently downward, the wind easing as if encouraging us forward. We followed it because resistance felt pointless. By late afternoon, the ground beneath our boots began to change. The snow thinned, giving way to slick ice that reflected the sky in pale, distorted sheets. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath the surface, deep and dark. One wrong step sent vibrations rippling outward, echoing faintly from below. That was when the ice gave way. It happened without warning. A sharp cracking report followed by a sudden lurch. The man ahead of me vanished as the ground collapsed beneath him. I lunged forward, catching his sleeve as he dropped, the fabric tearing under his weight. For a heartbeat, we were suspended between surfaces. Then the ice around us shattered completely. We slid downward together, bodies scraping against frozen stone, gear clattering wildly, breath ripped from our lungs. We landed hard in darkness, the impact driving air from my chest in a painful rush. For several seconds, I could not move or see. Then the sounds came rushing back. Groans, coughing, the frantic scrape of boots on stone. Someone struck a match. The small flame flared weakly, illuminating a cavern that stretched beyond the light in all directions. Ice clung to the walls like frozen veins, but beneath it was stone, worked stone. The ground was uneven, sloping gently inward, as though the cavern had been shaped deliberately. As more light appeared, we saw them. Bones lay scattered across the floor, half fused into ice, some old and yellowed, others darker, newer. Human bones, unmistakable, mixed with remains too large, too oddly shaped to identify easily. Helmets rested among them, rusted and cracked, designs from different decades, different nations. A bayonet lay snapped clean in half, metal twisted the same way we had seen before. This place was not a cave. It was a repository, a collection. The walls told the rest of the story. Carvings covered the stone, deeper and more detailed than those we had seen above. Lines depicted men marching into the earth, guided by figures taller than any human, their limbs elongated, their heads crowned with shapes that suggested antlers or jagged ice. Some scenes showed offerings, food, weapons, fire laid out carefully. Others showed what happened when nothing was given. Bodies dragged downward, swallowed by darkness, erased. A few carvings were newer, the grooves sharp, the imagery familiar enough to turn my stomach. Uniforms like ours, packs like ours. We were not the first soldiers to be led here. The cold intensified as we stared, breath frosting thickly despite the relative shelter. A low sound pulsed through the cavern, rhythmic and deep, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It was not coming from any single direction. It came from the stone itself. One of the men whispered that we had fallen into its heart. I believed him. Panic surged then, sharp and desperate. Some shouted about climbing back out, about blasting a way through with charges we no longer carried. Others simply sat down, staring at the bones, the carvings, their resolve draining away. The lieutenant tried to restore order, voice cracking as he barked commands that no longer carried authority. As if in response, the sound deepened, the vibrations growing stronger. Ice shifted overhead with a groaning complaint. Dust sifted down like pale snow. We understood instinctively that noise was dangerous here. Silence returned in fragments, broken only by labored breathing. That was when the realization settled over us, cold and absolute. This place was not a trap meant to kill us quickly. It was a threshold. Those before us had come here and made choices. The carvings showed it clearly. Some groups had left offerings and been allowed to leave, fewer in number but alive. Others had resisted, had fought, and none of them walked back out. The thing that hunted us did not want mindless slaughter. It wanted recognition, acknowledgement, payment. The lieutenant looked at us then, eyes hollow, and said what none of us wanted to admit. We could not outrun it. We could not fight it. If we wanted to survive, we would have to play by rules older than any army manual. The sound pulsed again, closer now, the cavern seeming to tighten around us. Shadows stretched along the walls, elongated and distorted, hinting at a presence just beyond sight. I felt the weight of the land pressing down, not physically, but with expectation. We had crossed from patrol into legend without realizing it. And now the legend demanded an answer. As we gathered what little we had left, rations, ammunition, personal tokens, I understood that the next decision would decide who, if any of us, would ever see the surface again. Some predators chase. Others wait until you understand why you were never meant to leave. Time lost meaning inside that cavern. Without sky or horizon, hours folded into each other, measured only by the ache in our joints and the slow drip of melting ice. The sound beneath the stone never stopped. It pulsed steadily, like a massive heart beating far below us, patient and unafraid. We gathered what we could in the dim light, hard bread, a few tins, ammunition that now felt ceremonial rather than useful. No one spoke loudly. Even whispers felt intrusive, as if the cavern itself were listening for tone as much as words. The lieutenant ordered a small offering prepared, mimicking the carvings as closely as possible. A ration tin was opened and placed carefully on a flat stone. A rifle was laid beside it, bolt removed. A strip of cloth cut from a uniform sleeve followed. Each item felt like a confession. When we stepped back, the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, but charged, as though something vast had shifted its attention fully onto us. The shadows along the walls began to move independently of the light, stretching and retracting with slow deliberation. Then it emerged, not completely, not in any way my mind could fully grasp. A form resolved itself at the far end of the cavern, taller than the highest carving, its outline blurred and refracted by ice and darkness. It did not walk forward. It simply became closer. The pressure in my skull intensified, a sensation like fingers pressing gently but firmly against thought itself. I could not look directly at it for long. My vision slid away, refusing focus. Still, impressions burned themselves into memory. Height beyond scale, limbs that bent at wrong angles, a surface that looked less like flesh and more like compacted frost layered over something older. It did not speak. It did not need to. Understanding arrived uninvited. This thing remembered every footstep ever taken on this land. It remembered fires lit in defiance, weapons raised in fear, blood spilled without permission. We were not enemies to it. We were intrusions. One of the men sobbed quietly, hands over his mouth, eyes squeezed shut. Another dropped to his knees without realizing it, as if gravity itself had increased around the presence. I felt my thoughts slow, memories surfacing unbidden. Marches, battles, faces of men long dead. The thing sifted through them with impersonal curiosity, lingering on moments of violence, of arrogance, of men believing themselves masters of places they barely understood. The offering stone began to frost over, ice creeping outward in delicate, branching patterns. The vibration beneath our feet eased slightly, like a breath released. The lieutenant took this as encouragement and gestured for more. We added personal items then, dog tags, letters, medals. Each object placed felt like tearing away a piece of ourselves. When my turn came, my hands trembled as I removed the small token I had carried since enlistment, a carved piece of wood given by my father. I hesitated only a moment before laying it down. The air shifted again. The presence leaned closer, shadows thickening, and I felt a sudden, piercing clarity. This was not mercy. It was transaction, a rule-bound exchange governed by laws older than empathy. The thing did not care who we were, cared whether we understood. The man who had sobbed earlier broke then, rising suddenly, screaming, firing his rifle into the blur of darkness. The shot echoed violently, ricocheting off stone, shattering icicles overhead. The presence reacted instantly. Pressure slammed into us like a physical blow. The screaming man was lifted backward, body arching unnaturally as he was pulled into shadow. His cries cut off with brutal finality. The vibration surged, angry now, reverberating through bone and ice. We collapsed to the ground, hands over heads, helpless. When the pressure eased, the presence had retreated slightly, though its attention remained fixed on us. One rule had been made unmistakably clear. Defiance meant erasure. The lieutenant's voice shook as he spoke aloud, apologizing, acknowledging trespass, promising withdrawal. He sounded less like an officer and more like a supplicant. The presence listened. The carvings on the wall nearest us began to glow faintly, lines catching the weak light as if freshly cut. A new image formed slowly, painfully. Figures kneeling, fewer than before, allowed to turn back toward the surface. The meaning was unmistakable. Some of us would leave, not all. The thing withdrew then, dissolving into shadow and vibration until only the cavern remained, silent except for our breathing. No one celebrated. No one moved for a long time. We understood the cost had not yet been fully paid. The land had accepted the offering for now, but it would claim the rest in its own time. When we finally stood, gathering what little remained, I knew we were no longer soldiers on a mission. We were survivors bound by an ancient contract, walking on borrowed permission. And as we began the long climb toward the surface, I could feel its awareness still on us, patient and exacting, waiting to see if we would remember what it had taught. Night did not fall that evening. It descended, deliberate and unhurried, like a verdict being carried out. We emerged from the cavern just as the last trace of daylight bled out of the sky. The climb had stripped what little strength we had left, muscles trembling, lungs burning in air that felt too thin to sustain life. Behind us, the ice sealed itself again, cracks knitting shut as if the earth were erasing the doorway we had never been meant to find. No one suggested returning. The idea felt obscene. We regrouped on the surface, fewer now, quieter. Every man changed in ways we did not yet understand. The land stretched outward, pale and endless, but it no longer felt empty, felt occupied. The lieutenant ordered a short march to put distance between us and the opening, though we all sensed distance meant little here. The cold returned with renewed force as darkness thickened, a living pressure that seemed to push us together. Frost crept along our coats faster than before, patterns forming and reforming with unsettling speed. We made camp out of necessity, not strategy, scraping a shallow ring in the snow and feeding a fire that resisted staying lit. Sparks vanished almost immediately, swallowed by blackness. No one took watch rotations. We all watched, every sense strained outward, listening for changes in the silence, for the faintest disruption that might signal movement. My heart thudded so loudly I was certain it could be heard. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the land shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly. A subtle compression, like snow settling under great weight. I felt it through my boots, a vibration that traveled up bone and lodged behind my eyes. The lieutenant tightened his grip on his pistol, though we all knew how useless metal had proven. Shapes began to form at the edge of visibility. Suggestions rather than bodies, distortions in the darkness that hinted at immense height and controlled motion. It did not rush us. It circled wide and patient, testing our stillness. The fire guttered, flames leaning away from one direction as if pushed by an unseen presence. My breath came shallow, measured, every exhale a risk. One man whispered a prayer. Another clenched his jaw until I heard teeth grind. Then the cold spiked again, sharper than anything before. Pain flared instantly in fingers and toes, a vicious burn that stole focus. I watched a man's sleeve stiffen solid in seconds, fabric freezing into an immovable shape. He cried out, a short, broken sound, and immediately clamped a hand over his mouth, eyes wide with terror at his own mistake. The response was immediate. The pressure surged inward, darkness thickening, the vibration beneath us deepening into something that felt like anticipation. The presence moved closer, close enough now that the firelight warped, shadows stretching upward in impossible proportions. I could not see it clearly, but I sensed structure, mass, intention, memory. It paused at the edge of our circle, and in that moment I understood with sickening certainty that it was deciding who would remain. The lieutenant did something I will never forget. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, away from the fire, hands raised, posture open. He spoke aloud, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, offering himself as further payment. He acknowledged the rules we had violated, the arrogance of our presence, the debt still owed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cold eased slightly, just enough to feel like permission. The shape loomed over him, shadow folding inward. I wanted to shout, to move, to stop it, but my body refused. The land itself seemed to hold us in place. The lieutenant vanished without a sound, drawn upward and backward, erased as cleanly as the others. The pressure receded. The vibration softened. The presence withdrew into the dark, leaving the fire to burn a little steadier. We were left kneeling in the snow, gasping, alive. Dawn crept in slowly, gray and exhausted, revealing a camp ringed by untouched snow. No tracks, no sign of struggle, only absence. We did not speak as we packed what little remained. No orders were given. We moved because standing still felt dangerous. As we marched southward, the cold finally began to loosen its grip, temperatures rising to something almost tolerable. The compasses steadied. The silence broke, wind returning, carrying with it familiar sounds of a world that obeyed rules again. When we reached the first outlying settlement days later, the people took one look at us and knew. They did not ask questions. They gave us food, warmth, and space. Official reports later listed our losses as exposure and terrain failure. No mention was made of stone carvings, of offerings, of a presence that enforced ancient law. But at night, when I close my eyes, I still feel that longest night pressing down on me. I know now that survival was never about strength or strategy. It was about recognition, about understanding that some wars are not meant to be fought, only endured, and that some lands remember every man who believes otherwise. Some battles end when the shooting stops. Others follow you home and wait. I left the frozen frontier with fewer men than I could name and more weight than I could carry. When we finally crossed back into mapped land, where roads had names and rivers followed rules, the world looked unchanged, but it felt thinner, as if something essential had been scraped away. The officers who met us did not ask what happened beyond the border. They did not need to. Our faces answered for us. We were ordered to wash, to rest, to forget. Reports were written in clean, obedient language, weather anomalies, navigation failure, unavoidable losses. Ink replaced blood. Maps were redrawn with that blank white space marked permanently off limits. A quiet line no one would ever question. I signed my name where instructed, my hand steady only because feeling had not yet returned to my fingers. At first, I thought survival meant escape. I was wrong. The cold did not leave me when the uniform came off. It lingered in small ways, in the way heat never felt sufficient, in the way silence stretched too far before my nerves rebelled. I returned south, to places where people laughed loudly and fires burned without bending away. But part of me remained standing in that wasteland, counting breaths, listening for shifts in the dark. At night, I dreamed of stone walls etched with marching figures, of carvings that slowly gained new faces. Sometimes I recognized them, sometimes I did not. The worst nights were the quiet ones, when nothing chased me, nothing spoke. I would wake convinced that patience itself was watching, waiting to see whether I remembered the terms of survival. Years passed. The war everyone feared arrived in its own time, loud and modern and hungry. Men died by the thousands for reasons written in ink and shouted from balconies. I fought again because soldiers always do, but it never felt like real war anymore. Gunfire was simple. Artillery had rules. Even death on a battlefield made sense compared to what we had walked through in 1913. That land did not want conquest or victory. It wanted acknowledgement. I began to notice how often history buried such places. Expeditions lost to storms. Patrols erased by avalanches. Villages abandoned without explanation. Each story filed away as misfortune, as if naming the truth would invite attention. I understood then why the elders had refused to guide us, why their eyes had held something heavier than fear. They were not protecting themselves. They were protecting the balance. I never returned north. I never spoke publicly about what happened. Silence became another offering, another way of honoring the contract none of us had signed willingly. But silence does not erase memory. It sharpens it. I carried the lesson quietly, teaching it to myself over and over whenever I felt the old arrogance rise. Borders are lines men draw to feel secure. Maps are promises we make without asking permission. Some places predate both, and they do not forget being challenged. In my later years, I heard rumors that others had tried again. Survey teams, prospectors, soldiers with newer rifles and better clothing. The reports were always the same. Equipment failure. Sudden storms. Men vanishing without trace. The blank space on the map never shrank. If anything, it grew. People began telling stories in taverns and mess halls. Half-joking tales about a land that eats armies. About a cold that watches. Legends, they called them. I never corrected them. Legends are safer than truths. Now, as I write this for no one in particular, I understand why I was allowed to leave. Survival was not mercy. It was responsibility. I was meant to remember, to carry the warning forward quietly, imperfectly, through lived example rather than proclamation. War teaches men that everything can be taken if enough force is applied. That winter taught me the opposite. Some powers do not yield. They endure, they wait, and they collect debts with interest when forgotten. If this account is ever read, let it stand not as a challenge or an invitation, but as a boundary marker more honest than any drawn on paper. There are places where victory is measured not by flags planted or ground secured, but by restraint, by knowing when to turn back, by understanding that survival sometimes means accepting you were never meant to win. I survived the frozen wasteland of 1913, but something ancient survived me as well. It will outlast uniforms, nations, and wars, watching patiently as it always has, waiting to see if the next generation remembers what the last one tried to forget. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.